Okay, let's get into it. Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
This is where we take, various source materials, could be articles, videos, research papers, and we really try to boil them down.
Yeah, find those key insights, the core arguments, basically save you the trouble of wading through it all yourself.
Give you that shortcut to understanding what's important. And today, we're looking at a really interesting source. It's a YouTube video, Self-Embargo, Uzgir Toplum Mekanide, by Ercan Turan.
Right. And it tackles a question that feels, well, pretty relevant right now for a lot of people.
Which is?
Basically, how can you, as an individual or maybe part of a group, actually exert influence or, resist power when the usual ways politics, voting, protesting just seem blocked or ineffective?
Yeah, when those doors feel closed, what do you do then?
Exactly. And the answer this video puts forward is pretty surprising.
It really is. It revolves around this idea of, well, doing nothing.
But in a very specific way, through economic means, kind of deliberate economic inaction.
It's not just giving up, though. The source frames it as an active resistance strategy.
It does, and it uses the French philosopher Michel Foucault to set the stage. Quotes him saying something like, every historical formation, every power creates its own forms of resistance.
That's a powerful starting point. Suggests resistance isn't separate from power, but grows out of it somehow.
Precisely. So that's our mission for this deep dive. Unpack the argument from this video, look at the philosophy behind it, the specific economic actions it suggests, and what it claims the impact could be.
Okay, so let's start with that core idea. The video's main premise seems to be, if you're in a situation where changing the government or the powers that be through politics just isn't working.
Right, whether that's in a pluralistic system or something more majoritarian, doesn't matter. If the political tools are off the table.
Then the video argues there's another way. You have to shift your focus.
Yeah, it talks about the individual as an economico-political being. You operate in both spheres.
Economico-political.
Okay, so if the political field is blocked, well, the argument is you have to move your action over to the economic field.
And that action is?
Doing nothing. Or maybe a better way, stopping.
Just stopping.
Yeah. And the source actually calls this act of stopping a revolutionary act.
Revolutionary. That sounds big. For doing nothing. How does that work?
Well, the logic presented is by not playing the economic game, the one set up by the ruling power, you start feeding it.
So you stop giving it the resources and participation it needs to keep going.
Exactly. You're earning, you're spending, investing. The source argues that all sustains the system. If you continue playing, you provide continuity.
So stopping is like saying, nope, I'm not participating in this version of the game anymore.
Right. You're withholding your economic energy. It's framed as a kind of defense, an active defense tool, actually. Not attacking, but defending yourself by refusing to fuel the system.
Okay, that makes the revolutionary claim a bit clearer. It's about undermining the foundations.
And it ties back to that Foucault idea, doesn't it? The resistance stopping emerges directly from how power operates, which in this case is seen as depending on economic participation.
The source also brings in another philosophical angle, right? Something attributed to Ibn Sina.
Yes, the Persian philosopher and physician. The quote cited is, sometimes doing nothing is the most healing path.
Healing? How does stopping your economic activity heal anything? That seems counterintuitive for fixing societal problems.
Well, the argument seems to be that maybe continuing to participate in a system you see as harmful or unchangeable is actually damaging. It's exhausting. Maybe it compromises you.
So stepping back, stopping, is framed as a way to regain strength or health by ceasing that damaging engagement.
That seems to be the idea. Finding health not in the struggle within the system, but in withdrawing from it. It's presented as both strategic and potentially restorative.
So you've got Foucault saying resistance comes from power itself, and Ibn Sina suggesting inaction can be healing.
Yeah.
It's building a case for withdrawal as a rational, maybe even healthy response.
Right. It's less about direct confrontation and more about cutting off the fuel supply, finding strength in that stillness. It definitely forms the philosophical backbone here.
Okay, that covers the why. But the source gets very practical too, doesn't it? It lays out the how. What does this economic stopping actually involve? What are these specific active defense tools?
Yeah, it gets quite concrete. It's about minimizing your footprint in the formal economy as much as possible.
So what are the steps?
First, it says freeze or postpone all investments. Stop putting new money into stocks, businesses, whatever.
Okay, cut off capital flow. Makes sense.
Second, convert income or capital you already have into physical gold. And importantly, keep it at home.
Gold. At home. Why?
The idea seems to be pulling wealth out of the digital, trackable banking system. Gold is tangible, harder for the state to control or access, especially if it's physically with you.
Right, taken offline, basically. What else?
Third, close most bank accounts and credit cards. Maybe keep one basic account for, absolute essentials, but drastically reduce reliance on banks.
Limiting your connection to the financial infrastructure.
Exactly. Fourth, cut spending down to bare necessities. Food, basic shelter, essential utilities, no discretionary spending.
Starve the consumer economy.
That's the aim. And fifth, avoid big transactions. Don't buy or sell houses, land, cars. Postpone all that indefinitely.
Wow. So no major market activity either. Those 5 points seem like the core actions.
They seem to be the main economic levers it suggests pulling. It's a pretty comprehensive withdrawal from business as usual.
It really is. But what does the source claim the effect of all this would be? It makes a huge claim about effectiveness, doesn't it? Something about a percentage.
It does. This is where it gets particularly striking. The video claims that if just 20% of the population actually does this, implements this economic stopping.
Only 20%?
Yes. If 20% do it, the claim is the ruling power or the state will be forced to change and transform.
How? What's the logic there? 20% isn't even close to a majority.
The explanation offered is about systemic impact. The argument goes that a 20% withdrawal creates such a major disruption.
Like a critical mass.
Kind of. Enough disruption that it forces the other 80% and the system itself to react and change. It breaks the equilibrium, essentially.
So the idea is the system is actually quite fragile, that it needs near universal participation to function smoothly.
That seems to be the underlying assumption, yes. That this level of non-participation isn't just an annoyance, it's a critical blow to the flows of money, demand, and resources the system depends on.
Which then leads to the question, who would actually do this?
Yeah.
Under what conditions would 20% of people decide to take such drastic steps?
The source outlines some conditions for this. It suggests it would only happen if the society, quote, has not lost its reason.
Meaning it has to be a rational, calculated decision.
Apparently, yes. Not just an emotional reaction. It also says the society needs to still value its own existence and continuity, want to live well. And, crucially, it needs to believe and want to show that the ultimate control still lies with the people, not entirely with the rulers.
So it's an assertion of underlying popular power, expressed economically when political expression is blocked. And it requires a certain level of collective rationality and desire for self-preservation.
That's how it's framed. And it mentions a couple of other actions, too, that go beyond just economics as part of this stopping.
Oh, what else?
It mentions avoiding marriage, and if you are married, avoiding having children.
Wow, that's profound. Taking it to a generational level.
Yes. It seems to view creating new citizens, new taxpayers, new economic units as another form of participation in the system you want to change. So stopping that is presented as another part of the strategy, a very deep form of non-cooperation.
Okay, so let's recap the main thread here. The argument from this source is essentially, if politics fails you, if those paths are blocked,
then there's this alternative path, presented as the path, economic stopping.
Using these specific active defense tools, freezing investments, holding gold, ditching banks, minimal spending, no big asset trades, and even impacting family creation.
Right. And the claim is that this is the rational response in such a situation, and that it could force change, even with only partial, 20% participation, provided society meets certain conditions of rationality and will.
It's definitely a perspective that forces you to connect your personal economic life directly to political power structures. We don't often think of them as that intertwined.
No, we tend to separate them. But this view makes economic inaction a potentially powerful political statement, or even a weapon, depending on how you look at it.
And that 20% figure, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How dependent are systems on widespread continuous buy-in? According to this source, maybe more than we think.
It certainly prompts you to consider what it means if your everyday choices, what you buy, where you save, could be seen as revolutionary acts, particularly if other avenues for change feel closed off.
So a final thought maybe for you, the listener, to consider. If political levers really feel gone, how much power do you think resides in economic choices, individually and collectively? And what does this idea of stopping tell us about where power might truly lie?
And maybe also, what would it really mean practically and psychologically to seek healing through that kind of profound economic withdrawal?
Definitely some challenging ideas to think about. This has been The Deep Dive. Hope it gave you some food for thought.